Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest back on the podcast for the third time, Cody Moxley. If you aren't familiar with him, he's a coach and project manager at N1. He is also a certified sports nutritionist through the IS. Cody, thanks for coming back on, man. The third time, like I said, you're a Grizzly vet now at this point of the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I guess in between last time we chatted, we obviously got to meet in person. You obviously were at the practical at N1. And so yeah, it was super cool to actually get to meet you in person and get some exercise tips from you and technique tips from you. It's pretty crazy, man, how like you think you're doing everything right, and then you come to these and you get somebody that knows more than you looking over your form, and you're like, damn, all right, there's still a lot of things that I can work on there. So it was super valuable to go there, and it was a great time. Do you always have fun doing those practicals?
Oh yeah, it's always a blast. I mean, you get such a wide range of like experience levels and stuff like that. Different body types to practice on. Like, I don't know any other occasion like as a coach where you get to see and work with that many different people in such a short amount of time, right? I think the experience of doing these has been probably one of the greatest tools for actually getting my skills up in setting people up and adjusting them quickly. Rather than, if I was just doing only one-on-ones, it's like, oh, you have, 5, 10, maybe 20 people, and you just see the same people over and over again, versus I see 20 people for 4 days. And then the next 4 days, it's a whole another group of people. So you really have to, get good at, the stuff that we teach you guys of just understanding the structural differences and the setup and all that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, that really is a skill to, be able to work with different body types. We're all the same, but at the same time, within that, there's a lot of differences. Just for example, in our specific practical, you have me, I'm 5'7" ish, 5'6", so definitely on the shorter side for sure. Cass called our group the Short King group. And then you have on the opposite end of the spectrum, there was a guy there. I think his name was Roman. I think was his name. He's like 6'10". So it's just like, just to kind of give you an example there of the differences. Do you like, this is kind of off topic, but I'm just curious as we're talking about it with somebody that tall. I mean, what are some things that you kind of have to like, is there anything that's somebody that is super tall like that they need to focus on specifically or change or anything like that, from normal guidelines?
I mean, setup and things like machines will usually vary. So we kind of talked about this when we went through the exercise setups during the practical, is like, if you have super long arms versus shorter arms and you use a machine that works on an arc, you're going to use a different portion or range of that arc. So someone who has shorter arms, it might fit them through their whole range of motion because they're only using a very small portion of it. Someone who's got arms like Roman that are 5 feet long, he's going to use a much greater portion of the arc, which means his path of motion is going to change angle much more drastically from short start to finish. So for him, a good setup, he might have to be only doing partials or set up to only do a partial range of motion for him, simply because of the limitations of that machine. Right.
Do you find that, like, do you think generally speaking it's tougher for taller people to build muscle and kind of figure these things out, or do you think again it's just there's a lot more that kind of goes into it?
No, I don't think it's just height. I mean, there's certainly a genetic factor, but I don't know that just being tall is a limiter in building muscle. I mean, certainly there's a couple of freaks out there that are tall and huge and muscular. So
yeah. Yeah. Again, probably going to cut, like you said, genetics probably going to play the biggest role there with that versus height. Just because, like I've always said, being short, I feel like it just, I don't know if it's just maybe, again, like, the way your limbs are, your body structure is, I'm sure is going to also have, a big role there. But I've always said that, like, being shorter, I feel like it's at least helped me look a little bit more muscular compared to somebody who's tall. But again, maybe I'm just trying to make myself feel better about that. So, cool, man. Well, yeah. Again, looking forward to chatting with you today. So it's been a little while since we've had you on the podcast. So any update on you? I know we're going to talk about your training and nutrition, but before we dive into that, is there anything like from like you personally, or then anything from N1 or anything like that you guys have going on there that you want to share, anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, well, me personally, and we'll talk about this about with the training and nutrition stuff. So I got a wedding coming up here in a
Congrats.
couple months. So yeah, thank you. So yeah, getting prepared for that. Of course, the stress of trying to coordinate all of those things,
Yep.
Prepare myself to, look good when I'm down there. And, my fiance is doing the same thing. So things are a little, hectic there. And then, on the work side, I think Cass might have mentioned it on a recent podcast, but our app is getting close to being done. It's been, shoot, almost 3 years at this point that we've been working on this. So we're pretty excited to get this thing out. It's definitely going to be very different from anything else out there, at least that I've seen, because we bought and subscribed for several different apps to kind of see what was out there, figure out what we liked, what we didn't like, what the current limitations are. So I think we've overcome a lot of those. It's definitely going to be, it's certainly going to look a lot prettier than most of what's out there. It's not going to look like you're just typing stuff in a spreadsheet with a confirm button. So I'm excited for people to get their hands on that and start playing around with it.
So with that app, is it going to be something that like, again, I don't know how much detail you can give, which whatever you can give that's totally understandable. But like, is it going to be something where it's like an app where it will like program for you, or is it for like coaches, or like what's going to be like the, kind of main use of it?
Yeah, so we did build it in mind with coaches in mind in the future. So that is a future plan. It will have both the current format as our training site is, where you can kind of pick whatever program you want, and it's all included in your membership. You can do whatever, whenever, but we're also building in a new feature, which will essentially kind of help periodize your training for you. So one of the biggest questions we always got with so many programs is, which one do I start with? What do I do next? How do I know which type of program to go to next? So we have actually built in what we're calling program plans, which essentially you pick your overall goal, answer some questions to help us figure out, your details. And it will have a periodized constructed plan for you that could be 6, 8, 10, 12 months long, that will use, a combination of the programs already on the site, maybe some specific programs for that plan. But the cool thing that I really like about it it's not just, okay, here's one program, do the next program, do the next program. It's actually going to give you options of programs within each step. So let's say, okay, we did a hypertrophy program. Now we need to do a conditioning phase. Okay, well, here's, 3 options of conditioning phases based on, do you want to train 3 days a week? Do you want to train 4 days a week? What level is your conditioning currently? Are you already in pretty good shape? Okay, do this more advanced one versus, a more, let's say, simple version. So it'll give you customization within the periodization itself, based on your schedule, what you feel like doing. You're like, oh, that looks like a cool program. Okay, these two are roughly equivalent. Just pick one that looks fun to you, type of thing. So that's a new feature I haven't seen anywhere else yet, that we have built in, that I'm pretty excited about.
Well, yeah. So it sounds like, again, it's, obviously you'll be able to do your workouts, have videos, stuff like that. It'll pick your exercises, you log it, and then you'll be able to progress and get a periodized plan, for, like you said, 8, 12 months, whatever it may be.
Yep. Yeah. And we have tons of stuff built in to like help guide your journey, if you will, along the way, for tracking. And I mean, you've probably seen some of the other apps, like you put in check-in stuff, but it's just kind of there. We're actually like displaying it in a way that you can use to make decisions for the future too. So another big feature that we'll probably talk about more later once it gets closer to launch. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's freaking awesome. Cool, man. What about you, from a training and nutrition perspective? You said you have a wedding coming up, so I'm curious to hear, are you, if you're doing anything special there to get ready for that, or what that looks like. But yeah, I'll hand it over to you.
yeah, I mean, so I started my whatever wedding prep, whatever you
Yep.
like to call it. But rather than, jumping straight into a deficit, I actually started with a conditioning phase. So I was in a surplus. I was doing hypertrophy stuff. All I did was back to maintenance, and I focused on conditioning for about a month. And my goal with that was, if my conditioning and tolerance to that stress is higher, once I'm in a deficit trying to train, or maybe I want to push volume in a deficit, I'll be more resilient. I'll be able to handle that better and recover from it better. So I was like prepping for the prep, or, preparing for the cut type of thing, rather than jumping straight into a deficit. And then from there, I just basically made some, tweaks based on where I currently was. So for example, you hear people a lot talk about, your steps per day, like, oh, aim for like 10,000 steps per day. And I was like, that's fine. But if you can maintain on less than that, I think there's a benefit. And here's why. My average step count on a day that I train, so I get out of the house and walk around, is like 3,000. It's like hardly anything, right? And we have stairs. I go up and down stairs, and that's 3,000 steps. So I'm like, all right, well, that's great for me, because if I want to significantly increase my low intensity energy output, I don't have to increase a huge number of steps to make a big percentage difference, right? So I was like, all right, I went from 3,000 to now I get 6,000 a day. Doesn't sound like much, but when you were doing 3,000, it's double. So added that in, only moved my calories down a little bit from maintenance. And then because I was in a deficit and I was doing a little more energy expenditure than normal, I just changed my training to I'm still doing tension-based stuff because my calories are lower. So I don't have a ton of, glucose, glycogen and stuff to burn through with metabolic things right now. So I'm taking more of a lower volume, high intensity type of approach. So still doing some length and stuff, volume definitely not as high. And actually the program I'm doing right now is actually one we will be having in the app, probably two versions of it. I really like it. It's kind of fun. You just get to train hard for like 3 sets per muscle group and you're done. But of course we structure it in a specific way. So yeah, that's been fun and it's easy mentally too. Cause it's right. Cause like, all right, I work up, I got 2 hard sets and then do some other stuff and then one more hard set and I'm done. So it's nice too, because in a deficit, like you can still get stronger in a deficit. So that gives you like a little mental, like goal or something to shoot for. And I've actually seen a little bit of that too, which is nice to give you a little bit of, positive training feedback rather than, oh, I'm getting weaker and I'm getting flatter and I'm getting smaller and, oh, now I got to do a refeed and that kind of stuff. So yeah, the hit stuff is fun. This is more actually what I like to use the hit style high intensity training type stuff for, just lower volume muscle. Because my goal right now is just muscle preservation, right? I'm not trying to get any bigger. So muscle preservation and then using most of my energy increase right now being from low intensity stuff. So that hopefully just it's, not draining much glycogen, so I can save that for training. Higher percentage of that energy expenditure is going to, hopefully come from fatty acid oxidation, from my conditioning already being pretty good, right? That was part of the benefit of the conditioning earlier. So getting better at metabolizing fat rather than glycogen at lower intensities. So
Cool.
that's
Yeah.
the game plan.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I did a cut before my wedding as well too. I made sure, like you said, the wedding prep, whatever the hell you want to call it. But I made sure to I don't know if this is kind of going to be your game plan. I do have some questions on your training that I want to get to, but I just was curious to hear about this. Are you planning on like dieting like straight up to it? Or are you going to maybe give yourself like a couple weeks, maybe to kind of reverse out of it? Have you thought about that yet? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, so my is to be as aggressive as I can early on, because obviously that's when I have the most fat to lose.
Yep.
So I can tolerate more of a deficit, relatively speaking, and then actually kind of taper down my energy deficit. So decrease the deficit as I get closer and leaner, is the plan. And I mean, I might just diet right up to it because we're gonna be there because we're actually traveling. So
Okay.
we'll actually be there for 5 or 6 days before the actual wedding. So I was like, well, if I'm a little bit depleted, I can, replete while I'm there
Pretty
with the
easy.
food and stuff a little bit. Yeah. So yeah, starting aggressive with the deficit and then, getting less and less aggressive as time goes on rather than the opposite, which is probably what most people are used to seeing is like, oh, you start in as little deficit as possible to see your body weight go down, and then you increase, increase, increase. It's like, well, I'm going to take the opposite approach because I've got more fat to burn now. So I should be able to handle more of a deficit rather than when I have to, try and lose those last 2 pounds or whatever. So plus it's nice to see the measurements and things changing more rapidly at the beginning.
Yeah, it's motivate, you're like, all right, this is working, it feels good. But yeah, like you said, that was definitely something I've changed my mind on too over time, is like, definitely more aggressive at the beginning. And I think too, from like you said your main goal, right? Well, not your main goal, obviously your main goal is fat loss, but one of your other main goals is muscle preservation, right? And to me, that seems like that's also going to lend very well to that as well too, which in turn is going to give you that kind of better look as you diet down. You're not going to feel as flat and whatnot either. So I think going that approach definitely makes way more sense there. Where did you kind of start this? Like, I guess maybe fill me in on like where your weight went to in your, your massing phase, and then where you kind of thinking it's going to end up now. Are you maybe less concerned about where it's going to end at now and more just, kind of the look that you're going for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely less concerned about the actual number weight, like my weight. I'm more concerned about specific measurements, right? It's like I have a goal waist measurement that I want to get to that I know I've been at before. I mean, as far as weight wise, when I ended kind of like my hypertrophy phase, I was at like 22. And then after, did my conditioning phase, I was down like 2 or 3 pounds. And then after the first month of actual dieting, I was down to 2, and now I'm down to like 213, 212 and a half. So it's been pretty steady. Waist went down like an inch and a half already in like 6 or 8 weeks. So it's on track to, as optimal, as optimistic as I was going to be, like that's pretty close to it. So
Yeah. When was the last time you did a fat loss phase?
super long time. Like I never really let myself get like very overweight, like maybe 15, 16% at the most. I usually hover around 14%. So I haven't done like an aggressive diet in a very long time. I mean, I would back off calories and, decrease volume a little bit, when I felt like I was just burnt out on trying to push myself volume wise, or I needed a mental break. I would kind of do that stuff as in like an intuitive deload, if you will. But yeah, nothing like this for, at least a couple of years.
And then in your like kind of massing phases, are you always trying to kind of push your weight up? I know you kind of said you would dial back your calories from time to time, but like, how did you kind of manage that? Was it periods of time where you weren't pushing your weight, I guess, kind of sprinkled in there, or did you not really focus on that?
Yeah, I mean, I keep an eye on it. Like I mean, I've weighed myself every morning for like the past
Yeah.
6, 7 years just out of habit. So I keep an eye on it and I'm looking for it to, kind of trickle up.
Hmm.
But more so I'm looking at, are my performance things moving in the right direction? Because I'll
Yeah.
see those move faster than my weight will if I'm, going for the lean gains type stuff. Um, I've never really been able to do like the super aggressive overeating, bulking type stuff. I just can't eat that much. Like my body's like, nope, no more food. So I do better with the more like conservative, steady, long-term like gain type approach. And then I just kind of maintain that and I'll swap in, a conditioning phase or a local metabolic phase, and then that'll kind of whittle away some body fat. So I'm like, okay, I don't really have to change anything, back to hypertrophy, keep going.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think, I think some people it probably is useful to really push your body weight up, but I feel like, after a while, it's like, I think that just kind of leads to you hope it is muscle, but it ends up leading to probably a little bit more fat gain than you would want.
Yep.
So, that's something that I've kind of messed around with this time too, is less focus on like seeing that scale weight go up quicker and just kind of letting it, like you said, just kind of trickle up over time and just really making sure that I'm not in a deficit for really any period of time, and really trying to avoid that as often as I can. I found that to be super helpful. Plus, just on the research around, surplus, and again, it seems like anything over, around 1% of body weight gain per month is like, all right, you probably maxed out the benefit of the surplus at that point in terms of the muscle building side of things. So
Yeah. Well, especially because like your cardiovascular capacity and stuff doesn't increase at that rate anyway. Like I noticed once I started getting around 120, I'm like, I am a little bit more tired than I normally am. I should probably do some conditioning stuff because like my lungs definitely haven't hypertrophied for the last like 12 pounds that I've added in the last several months. So yeah, it's kind of a marker for me. When I start feeling that, I was like, all right, it's time to, all right, I got to do the systemic phase now. Fine.
you said 120, you meant 220, right?
Oh, yeah, sorry,
I was
220.
gonna say probably
I
been a
don't
while
think I've
since.
been 120 in like I don't know how long.
Yep. Yeah, cool. Well, let's talk about your the training side of things real quick. So you kind of mentioned you're doing more kind of tension-based stuff now. And so you kind of mentioned that's more like, lower volume, kind of like, I guess, like what's kind of the like typical rep range that you would say that's
6 to 12. Like normally
okay.
for what I'm doing right now, because I'm only doing like 3 sets. My first two work sets are like 8 to 10 and 10 to 12, just because I'm like, well, if I hit, failure at 6 to 8, I could be burning through a little more energy type of thing. Or maybe because I'm tired, I don't want stability to become a factor, but a hard set of 8 to 10 or 10 to 12, like I can stabilize that even if I'm tired or exhausted or whatever, distracted, whatever the case may be. So
Yeah. And how does it kind of look? I guess what would be the main difference from like how you're training now to like what you were kind of doing, when you were massing and doing more
Mhm.
hypertrophy style work?
Yeah, so I mean, I was accumulating more volume during the hypertrophies. I was accumulating more volume around like maybe a 3 rep in reserve average. So like I finished, I was doing like a specialization program for arms, and like my main arm workout would be like, it ended up being like the first exercise was 7 sets, averaging like a 3 RIR. So I would start at like a 5 and work my way down to 0 over the course of 7 sets. And so like, weight increase was very minimal, but my RIRs would come down, even though I'm resting around, 2, 3 minutes or whatever. So just accumulating a lot of volume in that range, not really pushing all the way to failure, because once I do that, my performance is just going to drop. Whereas now I do as little submaximal work as possible to get me up to that working weight, and then I hit it and then I'm done. So like the way I have mine structured right now, it's like I do 3 sets specifically structured to like get me warmed up and prepped as fast as possible. Work set, come back, I'll do like, a down set, if you will. So drop the weight a little bit, aim for around the same rep range. That's it for that exercise. 2 out.
So it's more just kind of, it seems like maybe a little bit closer to failure and just less volume overall, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, so the first like so my warm up is like it's like 8 to 10 reps at like an 8 RIR, 6 to 8 reps at 6 to 8 RIR, 4 to 6 reps at 4 to 6 RIR, and then basically once I'm at that weight, I either know that is my weight for 10 to failure, or I can go up just a tiny bit and it's going to be failure for 8 to 10, right? Because if I'm like, oh, it's like 4 to 6 reps with a 4 RIR, okay, well it should be my 8 to 10 rep max. So I'm like, okay, I know my weight. I'm prepped. I've, moved it a couple of times. My body has felt how to stabilize it and coordinate the movement. All right, now we go, and then we're done.
Would you ever use this kind of tension based kind of training like outside of a fat loss phase, or do you think this is kind of where it's best suited, or does it just kind of depend?
Oh, no, I could absolutely see an application for it for hypertrophy. I'd probably the first 2 sets would probably, or the first 2 work sets, I should say, would probably be structured the same. I would probably change how I do my third works or my third failure set for the muscle group. So right now it's actually a drop set with a shortened bias exercise. Whereas if I was going for hypertrophy, maybe I'd do like a rest pause, or maybe I'd go for something that's a little more lengthened bias and do a rest pause. So I'm accumulating more volume still at that high intensity rather than dropping off the intensity and pushing the local metabolic higher. So I'd probably make that adjustment if I was going to do something like this for hypertrophy.
Gotcha. On that topic, do you find that like rest pause and drop sets, do they, would you kind of push those towards certain exercises? Like you kind of mentioned there, it's like it's more short work and you would do more drop sets. Do you find that those kind of lend themselves better to that, or does it just, or does that not really matter?
Well, so the drop sets, you're going to be ending up with a lower average intensity than with a rest pause. And if you're doing drop sets and stuff, you have to pick an exercise that's easy to do the drop in a
Right.
reasonable amount of time. Like a barbell squat is not it. One, for safety, but 2, for running around and,
The weights.
doing cardio in the middle, trying to swap plates and stuff. So that's an exercise selection call. But again, rest pause is similar, right? You have to choose ones that are going to work well for rest pause. Like picking up a heavy set of dumbbells to do a press every 15 seconds. I mean, you're going to waste a rep or 2 right there just getting in and out of the exercise. So my exercise selection is probably going to change.
Yeah, it's more so again the kind of the practicality of it essentially is probably the most important when choosing those. Cool. And then the last kind of question on this well on your training, what you mentioned conditioning. What did that look like? Was it like, when I hear conditioning, I'm thinking, you're doing like kind of cardio based training. Is that essentially what it was, or was it like, kind of how you changed the way you lifted weights? What did that look like?
So yeah, it was more like systemic superset. So I'm doing on like pairing like 2 big body parts in one small, or 2 and 2, and I'll go, big muscle, small muscle, big muscle, small muscle, repeat type of thing, picking stuff that's gonna not overlap too much, so that the individual sets can be fairly high intensity for what they are. And I end up getting limited by my cardiovascular ability to handle that amount of density of tissue being worked, rather than not resting long enough and getting a local fatigue, or getting fatigued because I just worked a synergist or an agonist or whatever. So yeah, I mean, it was pretty simple. I mean, I did like, hack squat and then a lateral raise and then a leg curl and then a bicep curl or something like that. And then I'd do 3 or 4 rounds of that. And then I would change the exercise selection a little. So I'd usually do a couple lengthened things early on when I'm further away from fatigue. And then as I start getting fatigue, I would pick exercises that had less stability and coordination demand, right? So like I did a squat in there. It's like, well, I'm probably not going to do that too close to the end when I'm getting fatigued, and just coordinating the squat is the challenge. So then I swapped that out. I was like, okay, now I'm going to do a leg extension, and I did the multi-hip for glutes or something. So same muscle groups, but more stable exercises and a little more shortened bias, so I can like take them closer to failure.
And so with that type of training, again, the goal, like you said, is to kind of build up that, obviously, the conditioning. And I think people would hear this, and it seems like this is kind of a lot of training that people maybe do to help like lose body fat, right? Like that's like what they're trying to do to lose body fat. But from my understanding, this type of training, again, obviously the main goal is to improve the cardiovascular system, right? Like that's the main goal of it. And from my understanding, doing this type of training for too long, it kind of has like the return on investment kind of starts to go down as you the longer you kind of do this type of training. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I mean, when I do it, the main goal is definitely conditioning, but you could certainly use it for a longer period of time. You just might not take the intensity and volume quite as high, right? But like you said, the adaptations on the metabolic stuff tend to happen very quickly, and then the amount you can progress tapers off fairly fast. So usually with myself and clients, I'll see 2 to 3 weeks, you're gonna get probably like 80% of your adaptations for like a systemic conditioning phase. And then, to get the other, whatever you're going to get out of that program, maybe it takes you another like 2 or 3 weeks. So at that point, I'd rather just switch to something else because, you got 80% of the value and our goal was conditioning. We can use other things to push fat loss. But the benefit to something like that is you can train frequently. So if your goal is fat loss, that can be a benefit to you is I'm training a lot of muscle tissue and I'm training it frequently and I'm not, creating a ton of, local inflammation that's going to delay my recovery or make me feel sore or, whatever. So you get the nutrient partitioning benefits, the muscle preservation benefits of that frequent exposure to tension. So that's another, I think, why people really like or use systemic stuff a lot for fat loss is you get those benefits. But if you push it too hard or too long, you can see, or if you don't have enough supporting nutrition, you can see degradations in your sleep quality and recovery, even digestion sometimes. And at that point, it's like it's really time to get out of that and go to something else.
Well, and I would imagine too that again, if you are trying to add some muscle, it probably isn't the best one to be in for extended period of time either, as well too, right?
No, because you're getting limited by metabolic barriers rather than the actual like volume of tension that you're creating in the muscle. Like, I mean, I think when I was hitting failure in my squats, I was doing like whatever 225 or something per set to 10. It's like I know I can do more than that for a set of 10. So you're not getting the intensity that you would resting longer or doing a different stimulus or type of training that's going to drive better. But if you have someone who's a beginner, they adapt to everything and anything. So they could certainly get enough tension stimulus going from 0 to,
Yeah.
3 times a week even to get hypertrophy in that program. But as you get more advanced, you're going to have to differentiate and be a little more specific.
Do you think this could replace somebody doing like, your kind of traditional forms of like cardiovascular type training? Was that something you did as well too? Do you do any of that? And when I say that, I'm, thinking like bike or something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean the main difference is just what tissues you're using, right? So all of your traditional cardio stuff is lower body, hams, glutes, quads, calves, whatever. You really don't ever get any upper body stimulus unless you're doing like an assault bike or something. So I actually prefer doing it with weight just because I can get tension across more tissues. I can actually create a greater systemic stress, but less local stress. So to get the amount of systemic stress I can get from doing 4 different body parts in with minimal rest, I'd have to be like sprinting or running uphill or going up a stairmaster as fast as I could for who knows how long. And at that point, I might just get limited by the lactate buildup in my glutes and quads or something, rather than, actually just my cardiovascular and cardiorespiratory system being challenged.
Cool. Actually, I lied. This is one more question. Any exercises that you are digging at the moment? Anything that you're like, man, I haven't, either you've done it for a while or something you didn't think, or is there anything that you're really enjoying or any new exercises that you're really liking?
I mean, a couple I've been doing for quite a while now, just the like the lying arm supported preacher curl. So like we did that one at the camp where we had the arm supports on the
Yeah.
bench and we were like lying back. So it's like an incline curl, but your arms are supported. I really like that one. It kind of checks all the boxes for me as far as hypertrophy and stuff goes. And I really like the sissy style leg press for just
Yeah.
length and quad because I used to love hack squat and I still like hack squat, but at a certain point with enough load, just it's hard to breathe, honestly. Whereas I can push myself just as hard in the sissy leg press and breathing is not an issue. So really
Yeah.
been doing those two quite a bit. And of course the pull arounds on the prime pull down is, all time. one of the best, probably one of my favorite exercises ever
Yeah.
created.
That's actually funny you brought up the one for the curls. That was actually something I wanted to ask you about. So yeah, so basically is there, again, you have the bench where you can put those pads on. How would you, with that exercise, I guess maybe what are the benefits of having that kind of elbow supported like that and the back of the arm supported? And then two, are there ways that you can work around this in like say like a regular gym that if you don't have access to be able to, kind of put those elbows on that? Because you use the Prime, right, where it has the pads that you can kind of add on as a
Mhm.
piece there, I believe, right?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, so as far as benefits go, anytime you're trying to load, elbow flexion stuff, very lengthened biased, meaning the resistance is getting close to 90 degrees to your forearm when you're in full elbow extension. If you don't have an arm support, whatever load your bicep is having to do, your anterior delt has to do even more because it has an even longer lever to the resistance. So at a certain load, your challenge really might become the stability of managing the shoulder, and that can take away from some of the output you can actually get in the bicep to do the elbow flexion. So having the arm support takes that out of the equation. Now you have the stability that is no longer an issue usually, and you can just focus on the elbow flexion, and you can get a very lengthened biased resistance challenge, as opposed to, I mean, the incline cable curl, which we've taught before, where we talk about, yeah, maybe like 15-degree angle off of your forearm in the lengthened position. You get a decent challenge there, but it's still not, that's not where it's hardest. It's still a couple of degrees out. Just because we set that, kind of limit on the angle of the cable simply because of the shoulder. That became the problem. And as far as accomplishing it in a gym, like there's a lot of opportunities if you just kind of look around and, put your creative hat on. Like you could do it single arm and use an incline bench and just turn sideways and get into that shoulder extension position and use a bench that way. You might not get to full elbow extension depending on how big a dumbbell you're using. But even using like the pads on a pull down station, I've seen people do that. So you just sit backwards in the pull down station and use the thigh pads as your arm support, or do it one arm at a time if you have shift side to side, depending on how wide you are. If they have a preacher bench or a Scott bench with like 45, 60-degree angle, you can just lay back on that. That's actually the version I filmed for the exercise library. It's just me lying on the preacher bench, but really anything that can support your arm in that position. I've seen people use the like the functional trainer arms, or even the like the squat safeties, and just put a little pad on there and just lay back against that. Like, I mean, you're kind of curling in the squat rack, but if you superset it with the squat, it's probably fine. So, but yeah, there's a lot of ways. Just anything you can get behind your arm and get you in that position and support you is all you got to find.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Well, we'll call it the smart way to curl in the squat rack, I guess, right? Is that maybe the
Yeah.
better way to put it? Cool. Yeah, no, that's one exercise I've been wanting to do, but yeah, no, those are all super helpful there in terms of how I can make that work in a gym that doesn't have those. So cool. All right. Well, let's kind of talk about variables that influence exercise selection. So you had a post recently on that. I thought it was super interesting. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll kind of transition into most common hypertrophy programming mistakes. So I think this will kind of set the tone for the rest of the conversation here. So I'll hand it over to you, and if I have any questions on anything, I'll stop you and ask you on them. So
Sure. Yeah. And so I like to look at it in kind of two levels when we're, trying to look at exercise selection. The first is like your macro levels, like what is the goal for the workout or the program that you're doing? Like, are you trying to pick an exercise because you want to work on a specific skill, whether that's the skill of the movement or something athletic performance based? Are we trying to get strong at a certain movement pattern? That's going to influence it. Or are we like, I just want muscles, I just want hypertrophy, or you have some type of metabolic goal, whether that's systemic or local. Second part of that would be exercise competency. Like, how good are you at doing a given movement? If it's too challenging to have the skill to do it at a high effort, we might have to adjust, where we put it in the workout. If we're going to do it, if it fits with the goal of what we're doing, like if it's a high skill exercise and it kind of fits with our goal, but like my main goal is hypertrophy, not learning the skill of this exercise, maybe I don't do that exercise, even if it's a good exercise. Like could be a squat, but maybe you just, you struggle with coordinating the squat for some reason. Well, maybe we find something else that it's easier to stabilize and get output in, because the output and the tension is really what we're after, not coordinating the movement. And then order in the workout. So where is this exercise going? Is there going to be a lot of accumulated pre-fatigue either locally in that tissue because you're already doing exercises for it, or systemically? If it's going to have systemic coming before it, we might want something that's more stable or that's going to be easier to execute. If we're putting it early in the workout, well, we don't have to worry about that, but we might have to worry about, is this creating a certain amount of fatigue that we have to consider for exercises later? So those are like big picture kind of stuff. Then we look at the exercise themselves. We kind of like put it in four main categories. And Caslin goes into great detail on this in the program design course and the hypertrophy camp that we do as well, which I'll just briefly touch on them here. First is the stability coordination demand, which we kind of already talked about, is the skill of like how many joints are moving through space. How good are you at executing it? Specificity. So this is more of like, how well does that exercise train or create tension in a certain tissue? Whether we're talking about, just, pecs in general, or a specific division of the pecs, or a division of the glutes, a specific head of the biceps, head of the triceps, whatever, rather than just, oh, it's triceps. It's like, okay, but does it bias one more than the other? And that may not matter in every single program for every person. You might just be, I just need a tricep exercise, 100% fine. But there may be times if we're, talking about hypertrophy, we start pushing up volume, or we're trying to increase frequency and volume, or we're playing with things like variables like that. We might want to be a little more specific, where we're divvying up that volume so that we can potentially get more total work throughout the week or the time period, rather than just hitting the same tissue over and over and over again, and maybe we're under recovered, right? So that's a big one to know for specificity.
Well, real quick on that. So with the specificity, it sounds like it's like, all right, if you have like a certain part of the muscle that you need to work on, you obviously then need to make sure you find that specific exercise. But like you said there, if it's like, hey, you just want a tricep exercise, then obviously you have a lot more that you can kind of work around, unless it's like you're starting to do like a ton of volume or something like that. Then it's like, hey, we probably need to make sure that we need to start to get a little bit more specific in terms of the exercises that we're choosing then at that point.
Yep, exactly. And I mean, good example is like the specialization phase that I just did. Like, I didn't just do like the same 2 arm exercises every time I trained. I had ones that biased a little more of the long head, ones that biased a little more of the short head, or even just break the pecs are a good example. Like, you have someone doing a pec specialization. It's like, well, are you just going to do the same flat dumbbell press twice a week for like 10 sets each? Or could we maybe break it up a little bit and we do, upper chest one day, lower chest the other day, or maybe we do, clavicular and costal, so the most upper and most lower one day, and then we hit specifically sternal in the middle another day. Could that allow us to, one, accumulate more total volume without, with being able to recover and have performance increase, but two, maybe feel a little less fatigued in that tissue coming back to it. So it starts to matter the more specific, or the more specialized you want to get in your hypertrophy stuff. It's not just necessarily for, the Mr. Olympia that needs to bring out the lateral portion of his posterior delt. So we got to do a bunch of whatever special exercises. Yeah, works for us too, if we just want to get more volume and not feel like we're trashed every time we go to train that muscle.
Yeah, no, right. Yeah, that's where I see the probably most practical use for somebody that isn't trying to be Mr. Olympia. It's like you said, it's like you could potentially be using the same kind of joints, muscle, just be very specific in what you do over time, and that can lead to some issues the more you do. So yeah, that makes sense.
And then the next one, so muscle length. Are we training it at a very long muscle length, a relatively short muscle length, or somewhere in between? And that's going to play more into what is, again, our goal for the workout. Are we going for hypertrophy? Maybe want more things that are biased to a longer muscle length. If we're going for metabolic and very high frequency, maybe we want to err towards more stuff on the side of the short muscle length to maybe avoid some of those fatigue factors that come in when training at a longer muscle length. And then last would be the resistance challenge. So where is the exercise hardest? Is it harder towards the more lengthened portion of the exercise, more shortened portion of the exercise? And that will also dictate what our failure can look like. If we start talking about, partials, drop set, whatever kind of fancy set extension technique you want to use, and then how much volume we're biasing there. So those are kind of the four: the stability coordination, the specificity towards the tissue we're trying to train, the length that muscle is in, and then the resistance challenge where that exercise is hardest.
With the length, the short and lengthened, do you find that do you bias towards, I'm assuming it probably, like you said, comes back to the very first thing that we talked about, what is the goal of the workout? I'm assuming that probably plays a big role into it. But from a hypertrophy standpoint, do you try to bias one, or is it a blend? What does that typically look like?
Sorry, bias. What exactly are you referring to?
Like, do you try to, like, if you were to look at your program, is it like, hey, we're trying to maybe get a little bit more in the lengthened position versus
Oh,
more shortened position exercises, things like
yeah,
that?
yeah. I mean, for hypertrophy purposes, the majority of stuff is going to be more towards the lengthens. So like 60 to 70% probably, something like that. For a short period of time, maybe it's 100%, but I'm usually either before or after that program, I'm still training short position stuff. So I'm never neglecting loading the short position for most of these tissues. And a lot of that is, well, one, from like an orthopedic perspective of just keeping your nervous system good at being strong in those positions, because strength is position specific. So having the nervous system be coordinated and being able to utilize your tissue in all those positions can be good for overall joint health. So that's, yeah, for hypertrophy stuff, mostly lengthened. I still keep in some shortened or shortened-ish stuff, just because if I'm wanting to push into certain types of failure or do range of motion failure, so where you start to lose range but you keep doing reps as they get smaller and smaller and smaller, that typically works better with a more like middle to short resistance challenge. If you do something that's very overloaded lengthened, you usually get like one rep and then maybe a tiny partial and then you're done.
So when you say, do mostly lengthen, sometimes it's even like 100%. Is this like lengthen biased exercises, or is it like, hey, I'm only training in the lengthen position? Like, for example, you're doing like, say, a preacher curl or something like that, and you're only doing that bottom portion. You're not doing the full range of motion. Is that kind of what you mean by that? Or is it like, hey, does that make sense what I'm asking there?
Yeah, so I'd say the exercise selection is going to be lengthen biased. So more things that are in a lengthened position for the muscle and the resistance challenge is more lengthened. It's not necessarily I'm only staying in the lengthened portion of
Yeah.
those exercises. Yeah, there are still ones that I will still do like an RDL. I'm not going to try and do lengthened only partials of an RDL because I would pass out due to lack of oxygen to my brain. So like there's some exercises that just like lengthen only partials doesn't really work that well. And same thing for like the preacher curl, depending on how lengthened bias that is, doing the full range may actually allow you to get more reps because you get a little bit of a break on the tension at the top rather than just staying where it's like a million pounds at the bottom and you do like 4 reps. If I do full reps, maybe I can get 10.
Yeah, because I think that's important to kind of say, because some people may take that as like, oh, so you only just like train in a lengthened position, right? And it's like, okay, no, not that. Like you said, it's kind of the exercises that you're choosing that you're speaking of there. And then real quick on the stability part, why? And again, from a hypertrophy perspective, maybe briefly touch on why that's important and why we want to take that into consideration.
Yeah, well, so one is the more stable it is, the less energy you have to expend trying to stabilize yourself. So the more external stability the exercise has, less energy I waste trying to keep myself in position while doing the movement. So, for example, like a machine chest press versus maybe a press around. Like I can load a machine. I have a support behind my back. I don't have to worry about my torso position once I'm set up. I can just push into that load and work until I pop a blood vessel. Whereas a press around, you can still load it pretty heavy and you can be pretty darn stable. But because you're having to manage not only the rotational component of your torso, stabilizing that with your legs, maybe stabilizing the kind of the lateral movement of the cable pulling you back by holding on or leaning forward or leaning back or whatever, that expends a little bit more energy that maybe you could have put into the actual press. So that's why like I'm usually not just going to pick one exercise, even though let's say, maybe the press round is like it's super specific. It gets me to a long muscle length. It's got a long muscle challenge. It's fairly stable, but maybe I can't do like a 6 RM on that thing because I start sliding around. So maybe I train that at a little bit lighter load, or maybe not quite all the way to failure, or maybe I go to failure, but with a lighter load so that the load stability isn't the issue. And then maybe I finish with 1 or 2 sets of the press where it's way more stable and get a ton of output, but it's a little less specific. It doesn't quite get me to as much of a long muscle length. Maybe it's length and challenged, but I'm not getting to as much of a stretch. but I already trained that very lengthened portion and position with the press around. So you could make that case, or I could even make the argument of going the other direction. So
And really, it sounds like again the big thing is so then that way it's like you can really just kind of focus on that target muscle, right? Like that's really the main thing because it's like once you kind of have to start focusing on other things, it's like that's where you can you focus less on that target muscle. One example I can think of here specifically would be like let's just take like a Bulgarian split squat or some sort of split squat, right? I think people like think there's some there probably is some benefit to being able to do that on a single leg, but I think from a hypertrophy perspective, where I've kind of changed my mind down over time, learning about stability and things like that is you kind of see people maybe shoot themselves in the foot thinking that they're doing better by doing it without holding on to anything. But then like, once you hold on to something that makes you more stable and that can make that exercise a little bit more effective. Is that kind of a good example there of that in practice?
yeah, I mean, adding a little bit of stability, if it's not taking away anything else in the exercise, I'd say that's a net positive. Even, maybe it doesn't look as cool because you're holding onto a dowel rod or a bench or whatever, but if you get an extra 4 reps at the same load, like more gains. So
Jokes on them, right?
yeah. But I mean, yeah, and it's important to look at, like you said, it's all of these things on top.
Yeah.
And there are some cases, I mean, glutes is a good example. It's hard to find an exercise that like really we say checks all of the boxes simultaneously. Like, so that's why we'll often use, supersets where you use more than one exercise for a muscle group in a workout rather than just, oh, it's glutes, just do a glute exercise and do it hard and then you're done. In some cases that might work fine. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with finding, hey, this one works really well for these two things, and this one's really good for these two things. Let's do both of these in our workouts, or maybe we superset them, and maybe that gives me an additional programming benefit. We talk about that a lot actually in the program design stuff and the glute camp. But yeah, you can't just look at like, two of these things and be like, oh, long muscle length, resistance challenge, reverse Nordics are the greatest quad exercise ever to be created. I'm like, what about ability and coordination and loadability and all these other things that are also important for you? So you have to look at all of the things in context. It's like the sliders on the DJ's board. It's like, can you bump them all up? Or if one goes up, does the other have to go down type of thing? So
no, that's a really good point you bring up. It's like, you could see now where somebody like maybe they give no thought to this and now they hear this and now they like overly think like what exercise. And it's like, well, I can't do, what the hell can I even do that because you can overthink it. And it's like, there is no perfect exercise. You kind of have to weigh the pros and cons of it and see what kind of the trade-offs are. And then, like you said, it also, that's part of it is that one single exercise, but then how can we fit other stuff? How does it fit into the entire program as well too? And how can you make those adjustments there? Yeah. It almost sounds like you probably, and I think Cass kind of had a slide on this actually at the practical, but like you really don't want like one thing to be like it completely zero, right? Because then that like kind of makes everything else just out of whack. So it's like you want to probably find something that like is maybe really good at one or two things, but it's not like so low on any one thing. There, does that kind of make sense what I'm saying?
yeah. I mean, and that's where I'm saying like you can do more than one exercise a week.
Right.
I mean, unless you're, you only train 2 days a week and it's total body. Well, even then you could probably do 2 exercises a week.
Right.
But yeah, picking something that, checks most of the boxes more than less of them is, probably the way to go.
Generally a good idea to do that. Cool. Well, that's super helpful. Now, I guess we'll wrap it up with what are like, I guess maybe the most common kind of hypertrophy programming mistakes you see now that we, kind of went over all the variables that can influence exercise selection.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of already touched on one is just listening to the opinions of this is the best or worst exercise for hypertrophy based on one or two variables rather than looking at all of them in context. That's probably the biggest one. And of course, that's the most common on social media because it's people want a binary answers like best, worst, got it. It's usually not that simple, unfortunately. And I think the other is just a lot of them like misinformation on biomechanics. And again, that's a whole other topic in and of itself. But a simple example that you've probably seen this in the glute stuff is like girls posting stuff about, short position exercises or upper booty and lengthen position exercises or lower booty. I'm like, that is not how that works. So, but people who don't know any better, they don't know anatomy. They're just like, oh, this person, they have a good physique, so they must know what they're talking about. Or they see someone with a great physique do one exercise and they're like, oh, this is a great exercise for this. And it's like, okay, but that doesn't mean they also exclude the basic exercises. You can't say that one because this person does whatever double reverse banded, curtsy lunges on a BOSU, that's what built their glutes. I guarantee you they also did squats and lunges and leg presses and all those other things. You can't attribute it to one exercise. So not getting tunnel vision because you see a post of someone with a good physique saying this exercise is great, thinking that that's the only exercise they do. That's kind of like a false conclusion. As far as, I mean, and then getting into the programming stuff, I think it's easy to jump on the latest research and just go headlong into what the latest paper that came out said, but not forget about the stuff that's already been out there, not only published, but like experience wise too. So I'm trying to think of what a good example would be. I mean, and some common sense stuff. So I don't remember the exact paper, but it was comparing like straight sets and drop sets or something. And I forget how they equated it, but basically they concluded that, oh, it's the same amount, or it's no difference, or something like that. But the way that it was structured isn't a way that people would actually train. It was something like they equated the number of reps or volume or something. It's like, well, usually people don't do like one drop set or three straight sets.
Yeah.
Usually they'll do two or three straight sets and add a drop set at the end. And based on what we do know, probably adding that little bit of extra volume most likely would lead to a little bit more gains. So you can't just say, oh, it got the same, it's no difference, I'm not ever going to do drop sets. It's like, well, that's not really what it said, right? So being able to kind of parse that stuff out, I think, is important. And then not neglecting the exercises that just because they aren't ranked best for hypertrophy, thinking that you should never do them. So we talked about still including some shortened bias stuff, some shortened exercises. Is that going to take away from your hypertrophy gains by adding in, a shortened bicep curl? Probably not. Most likely adding that little bit of volume is going to maybe even help a little bit because it's a little bit of extra high intensity work. So not just thinking your hypertrophy program has to be exclusively only lengthen bias things, lengthen challenge, lengthen everything. And then we're going to add partials on every exercise that goes to a lengthened position. Like we talked about earlier, some exercises don't work well for partials. Like they just don't. Knowing when and where to apply those things. Because I know partials are a big thing right now. And they're like, oh, adding partials, in all these examples added, X amount more hypertrophy. And then thinking that applies to literally every exercise or every length and bias exercise. It's like, well, they didn't do that with RDLs. I don't think they did that with squats and the same load and all these other factors, right? So the partials and things all have to be exercise specific, the types of partials, whether it's integrated, whether it's after the exercise only. All those things. And that is stuff that, Kasim is working on getting that into the hypertrophy stuff so that people will actually have a guide rather than trying to hop around social media and look at the latest meme post of how many hundreds of percents of gains someone got in the distal rectus femoris. So it's in progress.
That's where you got to get your information from, man. Right.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of, those were all great. I think we kind of hit on this too, and we hit on this during the specificity part is just, I'm assuming this is something you see just kind of a lot of like overlapping kind of exercises, right? Oh, hey, like you said, just kind of looking for a tricep exercise or just looking for a pull down. So then you just do like a ton of variation of like pull downs or something, but they're all kind of like basically hitting the same thing over and over again, right? Like the classic thing that I can think of, for like or for back would be like you're doing a bunch of pull downs, you're doing a bunch of rows, and all of it's just very like upper back kind of focused, right? Versus like not really ever kind of switching that up. There, even though it's like you're doing different stuff, it's like different kind of pieces of equipment, but it all ends up kind of being the same kind of thing.
Yeah, you're doing the same exercise in different locations.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Just
Right.
different
Like, I'm
location.
going to do a dumbbell row, and then I'm going to do a cable row, and then I'm going to do a T-bar row. I'm like, it's the same arm path, it's the same range of motion, it's the same resistance challenge. Pretty much, you did the same exercise 3 times.
Well, that, and then like you could see it with chest too, right? Where it's like, hey, I'm doing a dumbbell, like kind of incline press on the dumbbell. I'm doing it on the barbell. I'm doing it on the Smith. I'm doing it on the machine. And it's all kind of the same, kind of thing there, even though it's like different pieces of equipment, it still ends up being the same thing. So just kind of another one there too. And that's probably why you see, maybe certain people are like, well, I've always, oh, you want a bigger upper chest, you just need to do incline. And then, that's all they do. And then, but it's like, there's a lot more that goes into it. So cool, man. Yeah, no, super helpful. Is there anything else you want to add to this topic or conversation?
No, I think hopefully that was helpful diving into some of the different things we're looking at when selecting exercises. I know for you guys listening, it's a ton of information. And you're like, well, where do I even begin? It's like just like I tell my like mentorship clients is like just pick one thing at a time, understand how it works, how to apply it, move on to the next one. Like you're like we didn't learn all this stuff all at once and then master it in a single day. It's like we dive into one thing, we learn to apply it, add the next one, add the next one. And the simplest one is just, I mean, we kind of talked about, hey, hypertrophy stuff, probably more length and bias things, position, you know, understand maybe, hey, there's exercises that are going to maybe hit the different divisions of a tissue. If I'm training higher frequency for hypertrophy, maybe I want to split those up across different days rather than just trying to hit the same thing every single day.
Well, and you guys hit on this a lot too. We can get super caught up in all these kind of nitty gritty type stuff, but at the end of the day, it's like, are you, kind of putting in that consistent effort, over time, right? Like that ends up, really like just to really simplify it, right? It's like we just spent all this time talking about all these small details, and it's like, well, I mean, just train hard. But I think there is something to that as well too, right? Where like that's a big kind of cornerstone thing that you need to make sure that you have nailed down too, before you really focus on all this. So it's like it's more so make sure that's there first before you really get kind of caught up in all these kind of small details.
Yeah, it's not either or, it's and.
Right.
Right.
And
Cassim had a really good meme the other day that he posted about the Olympic shooting thing. And through, if you haven't seen that, it's hilarious. So go watch it. But basically the point was it's not optimization and specificity or effort. It's effort and optimization and consistency. That's what's going to get you the progress. So if you have the effort and the consistency, just add this stuff on top, but don't let it, don't let the mental gymnastics of, oh, do I have the perfect degree set on the cable and my bench? Is it off by 5 degrees? And like sometimes just getting close enough and putting in the effort is like 100% better than wasting time on the little things.
and over time, that's something that you can continually, progress and get better at too, if you want to go that far into it. So cool, Cody. Appreciate your time, man. So next time we chat with you, you'll be a married man. So good luck with the wedding. Before I let you go, is there anywhere where you want to lead the audience to or anything like that?
Yeah, just keep an eye on the n1.education Instagram. That's where we'll be posting updates. And when the app gets launched, if you guys want to check that out, we'll have some exciting things planned for when that is ready. And that's probably the main thing. And then, from there, you'll see where to follow Cassim and myself if you would like to check those out as well.
Awesome. Cool, Cody. Appreciate your time as always, man. And we'll chat with you next time.
Sounds good. Thanks.